Good day, it's Constantine. In today's video, we are going to cover absolutely everything you need to know to get started with recording in your home studio. Now, initially, I wanted this to be a complementary companion to my Logic Pro tutorials, so with that in mind, I made sure that it is geared towards the complete beginner that doesn't even know what kind of cables they need to use. So I have broken this video down into two parts, and I have included all of my recommendations in part B, because otherwise this video would be more than an hour long. Part A, this one will have two versions. The short version, where I will quickly recommend everything you need to get started. So if you only want to know what gear you need to use, go watch that one. And this one, which is the long version, where we will go into great detail about everything. So the gear that I will suggest that you buy will be in the order that I think you should get first. So there's no point in buying, I will be sure to mention that, so there's no point in buying, let's say, studio monitors before you get an audio interface. And lastly, I am not being endorsed, so all of my recommendations will be my unbiased opinion, and have also broken it down into three categories price-wise. So get the one that you want based on your budget and your needs. Do you need to add anything? Yes, they will subscribe if they want to. The first thing you need is obviously a computer. It doesn't matter if it's a PC or a Mac. The only difference is that certain software only runs on Mac, such as Logic Pro, and some will only run on PC, such as Cakewalk. But almost every other software and third-party plugin will run on both, what is known as cross-platform. Now, what you should get depends on how often you are on the road and away from your home studio, and how demanding your projects will be. For example, I came to start in the UK, so I couldn't get a desktop because I was on the move a lot. If you are in a similar situation, a laptop could be a good option. If you are mostly in one place, then go for a desktop or a workstation. How powerful should your computer be? There's no one answer that fits all, I'm afraid. It all depends on what kind of audio work you will be doing. Do you just record your ukulele covers, and that is the correct pronunciation by the way, then you don't need a lot of power. If you want to do electronic music or want to go deeper into music production and start mixing and mastering your music, then you would need something more powerful. And let's say you are a media composer that uses, lots of virtual instruments and you have 50 tracks per session, then that is going to use a lot of power, and that translates as something way more expensive. Now, instead of complicating things and going over what type of processor and how much RAM you're going to need, I would suggest that once you pick your DAW, and we will look at what that is in a bit, you can simply go to their website and look at the minimum requirements to run the software. So let's say you are going to run Ableton Live, then you need minimum an i5 and 8 GB of RAM. If you look at Cubase, it's the same thing. You can of course get something below the recommendations, but I will strongly advise against it. If anything, if you can afford something better in terms of CPU and RAM, go for it. I can almost guarantee you that even though you might be doing just guitar covers, eventually you are going to start experimenting with making it sound better, just putting some compression in it or EQ, or getting started with mixing and plugins, and that will use more power. Then if you're a music producer, I would recommend at least 16 GB of RAM, more if you can, same if you're a songwriter, and if you're a composer that is doing a lot of demanding work, then you need to max out, because the virtual instruments you are going to be using will be RAM hungry. For that, you're looking at 32 GB of RAM, possibly more. For reference, most professional film composers have their main computer and then they have the slave computers, and they're connected to each other via software like Vienna and Sample. So that's a lot of power. But don't go crazy with it. You don't need all of that when you're first getting started. So choose depending on your budget and your needs. Last suggestion about storage, always go for an SSD. You don't have to go crazy because it's very expensive to get a large internal one. So what I have done is to complement my internal SSD with an external one where I keep most of my libraries. and since it's a USB-C, I do not have any latency issues. Final advice, do not get the cheapest one you can, get the best one you can afford. DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. That is a piece of software that allows you to record audio and then do whatever you want with it. That includes editing, mixing to make it sound better, manipulating the sound for sound design and experimenting with audio effects, and of course, using virtual instruments. You can create anything you want with it. You can, for example, record a real orchestra, or you can use a virtual orchestra within the DAW. And that somewhat answers our next question. Which one do you choose? In their core, they all do the same thing. You can produce anything that you want in all the big DAWs, but the way they do things is a bit different. Some are better for live performances, some are better for sound design and MIDI work, and some have a better workflow when it comes to mixing. And let's get the obvious out of the way. If you're a hobbyist or someone that does very little audio work and just, that includes just recording your YouTube covers or your voiceover, then you don't need to pay for it. You can use a free DAW. If you are on a PC, I recommend Cakewalk, which is actually a professional one. I'm honestly surprised that it's free. And if you are on a Mac, you can actually use GarageBand. And if you do podcasts and even some music recordings, there is Audacity, which is cross-platform, and Pro Tools First is also cross-platform. Now, if you want to upgrade, a lot of DAWs have a light version of the software. It has limited features, but it is more than enough if you're not a pro. And now, for the ones that want to do some more advanced audio work. The three that I personally use are Logic Pro, Ableton Live, and Pro Tools. I use all three because, as I have said earlier, things are done differently on each one, and sometimes it fits my workflow better. Now, you don't need to know more than one, especially for starters. Just pick one and I can guarantee you can do everything you want with the one you pick. There's nothing that you can produce, for example, in Ableton that you can't produce in Logic Pro or Cubase. The difference is just the workflow. Now, other DAWs that you can have a look are So, you have your computer and you have chosen your DAW. The next step would be to be able to listen to what is happening inside the software. Before we get into that section though, I think it is important to understand what frequency response is, because it will help us buy the correct equipment. So in this section, I will quickly cover what frequency response is, so if you know all about it, feel free to skip this section. Now let's take it from the very beginning. In music, or any kind of audio work really, we deal with sound. Sound is created when an object vibrates. In our case, for example, I'm talking to you, my vocal cords vibrate, that disturbs the air particles, and it creates a waveform that travels to your ears. And the medium that sound is traveling through is air in our case. Now that may not be very interesting musically, but as musicians, producers and composers, we do need to know what frequency is. So frequency is the number of times a waveform repeats itself, and it is measured in hertz. And that is important in music because it translates to pitch. So the slower the frequency, the lower the pitch. The faster the frequency, the higher the pitch. That also translates as musical notes. So for example, a frequency of 440 Hz would be the note A, or more specifically the note A4. We put the number next to the note so that we can identify which octave it belongs to, because we have more than one A note. Now, when it comes to actually buying equipment, we have to look at the frequency response, which is the range of frequencies that this product can reproduce. Now, technically, the human hearing has a range of from 20 to 20 kHz, technically. So most of the products you will be looking at will be something close to these two numbers. Now, let's say that you buy a pair of studio headphones or studio monitors. You need them to be able to reproduce the sounds that you will be producing. So always check the frequency response chart of any product that you're going to buy. And now we can finally talk studio monitors and headphones, because you have to listen back somehow. In order to connect studio monitors or speakers, if you will, you need an audio interface, but I decided to put speakers and headphones before audio interface in the order of the video, because you can still use headphones without an audio interface. Now this section might get a bit complicated for the complete beginner, but I'll keep it brief and I will cover only the basics of acoustics in regards to monitors. Now, the obvious beginner question would be, can I not use my laptop or my Bluetooth speaker? And the answer is yes, you can, but you will get better. But as you get better and you want to start experimenting with mixing or even doing the bare minimum amount of mixing before you release something, you will need something that is a bit more honest with your sound. So you see, laptop speakers do not have a great frequency response. And if we look at a frequency analyzer or spectrum analyzer and play back a bass track, you will see that most of its energy occupies the low end area and can go all the way down to 20 Hz. And the laptop speakers start losing the frequencies below 400 Hz. So that means that your laptop won't be able to accurately reproduce the sound. So when you want to start experimenting a bit more with mixing, etc., you will need studio monitors. You need to avoid hi-fi speakers though, as they color the sound. You need mixing monitors that do not color the sound. The more neutral they are, the better. So you need flat response monitors. If you can make your music sound good in neutral sounding monitors, then it will translate well on most speakers and listening devices. So there are a few important things we need to cover before investing into monitors. I'm assuming that since you are watching this video, you are most likely a beginner and not a professional working at a commercial studio. So you most likely do music in your bedroom or in a similarly, acoustically treated space. So there are two options on this one. One says that the size of the speakers should be relevant to the size of the room. Bigger doesn't always mean better. By size of the speakers, we are referring to the woofer. So the most usual ones are the 5-inch ones and the 8-inch ones. Now the theory is that if you get a speaker that goes down to 20 Hz, for example, and you put it in a room that the lowest waveform that can be developed is 50 Hz because of the size of the room, you will get standing waves. A sound wave needs at least half of its wavelength in room size to run back and forth. Otherwise, they will bump into each other and they will start building up. And that creates some unwanted side effects. It creates room modes, and room modes can create acoustic distortion or cause a dip or a bump in certain frequencies, meaning you might think you're missing something, and then, for example, you're like, okay, so I'm just going to EQ it in, and then you do that, and then you hear your project at another system, and it's overwhelming, and you're like, what was I thinking? So in order to avoid that, some people suggest that you get smaller monitors, 5-inch ones, that do not go to such low frequencies. There's a great website actually to check the problematic frequencies according to your room size. If you want to, just check the link in the description. The other option is to get the usual 8-inch, because no matter what, you can't avoid bass issues in small rooms. So you turn the volume down to have similar sound pressure to the smaller monitors. And since it's a bigger speaker, you will have less distortion. And if you really think about it, most modern speakers, even though they are just 5 inches, they do go down to 50 Hz, and 50 Hz is one of the most problematic frequencies to deal in a room. So the key thing is, no matter which one you pick, room treatment. So put some bass traps in the room. Well, to be honest, you need to treat your room no matter the size of your monitors. And you have to make sure that the placing of the monitors and your listening position is spot on. Now, I won't go into detail about that because we have already covered a lot for beginners. That's for another video. Now, I can't tell you which one of these two approaches is correct. I have had chats with very respectful engineers and I see that they use both. I doubt it makes any difference, but I went with the second approach. I had no idea about room acoustics at the time though, so I just bought the 8-inch speakers because I wanted that, that big bass. And then I realized that I had to treat my room. And lastly, there is the option of adding a subwoofer. That is assuming you get a bit better with audio production and you want to start experimenting with mixing, or you simply just want to experiment with certain bass-heavy genres. So, do you really need a subwoofer? Again, it depends. For most of the cases, I would say no. If you are in an untreated room, then you will most likely cause more problems because of what we have already discussed. If you only record your guitar and your voice, and then you absolutely do not need it. If you're doing EDM or sound design, or you want to do some 5.1 work, then yes, you do need it, because you have to hear what is happening down there at those very low frequencies. But again, room treatment comes first. Do not get a sub if your room is untreated. Now, second option for listening back to what you're working on is headphones. Again, as with the monitors, you need something neutral, something flat response. These are most commonly known as mixing headphones. And we want this for the exact same reasons as with the monitors. Now, commercial headphones will color the sound. They might have a bass boost or boost another frequency to make the sound more commercial. Now, we have two types of headphones. We've got open back and we've got closed back. The difference is that open back headphones allow the air to pass through the ear cup. That means that there will be audio bleed. And closed back is the complete opposite. No air passes through and they offer very, very good isolation. So which one is better? None. It depends on what you want to do. So if you want to do mixing and production work, then open back is preferred because it allows air to escape, air as in sound. So there is less pressure build-up, which in turn might have a better frequency response. And one of the most important things that no one cares when they're starting out is that they're more forgiving with ear fatigue. Yes, ear fatigue is actually real and it's a big problem when you're mixing. Now, closed back, on the other hand, are great for tracking because the audio won't bleed through your recording. Now imagine you are recording vocals and while listening to a backing track. So with an open back, most of what you're listening to will actually bleed through the mic. So choose the ones that will serve you best according to what work you will be doing. Now, headphones offer some advantages compared to studio monitors. You can work any time of the day or night without disturbing your housemates or neighbors or whoever, and you can actually take them everywhere with you. Are you traveling? Are you living abroad for a few weeks? Being on the road? Very easy, just put them in your backpack. And you don't need room treatment. If you're only listening and not recording, that is. Of course, they have their disadvantages as well. The usual suspect, bass, that might be a problem. And I don't have that problem with my headphones because I have learned my headphones. I know how they behave in the low end, but I do have a problem with reverb. I can never get it right. I think I've added the right amount and then every time I check on another system, it's nothing but reverb. Next, we need to talk about audio interfaces. An audio interface is responsible for many things. The most important thing would be the analog to digital conversion. So what that means is that whenever I'm recording something, and that can be anything, let's say my voice with a microphone or an electric guitar, that's just an electrical signal. In order for our computers to be able to read that and play it back, it needs to be converted to a digital one. So there needs to be an analog to digital conversion. And the audio interface is responsible for that. If you really want to know more about analog to digital conversion and sample rate or buffer size, I cover all of that in detail in my Logic Pro tutorials. So click on the card that appeared or click the link on the description. Now, another thing that the audio interface does is that it allows you to connect your monitors to your computer. So the obvious beginner question would be, can I not connect my speakers with a MIDI jack to my computer? Technically, you can. But I would strongly suggest against it as the sound quality is inferior. Other than the monitors, you can also connect your headphones to your audio interface. So basically anything sound related that goes in or out your computer has to pass through the audio interface. Example, I want to record my vocals. So here's the vocal path, the signal path. My microphone will be connected to my audio interface. That in turn turns the signal from analog to digital, and that goes to my computer. Then that goes back to the audio interface, and that goes out to either my monitors or my headphones. Now, next important thing you should consider when you invest into an audio interface is the number of inputs and outputs. In super simple language, how many microphones, instruments, effects, and how many monitors you want to connect to it. Again, as before, that will depend on what kind of audio work you will be doing. If you're interested in doing voiceovers or vocal covers for YouTube, whatever, then you can get away with a single input. If you want to record the piano, minimum you need 2 inputs to do a stereo recording. Drums, anything from 3 to 14 inputs. Same with podcasts, you need as many inputs and microphones as many speakers as you have. Now, as you can see, one answer doesn't fit all. You need to think what kind of work you will be doing or might be doing in the future, and then go with that setup that will support it. Personally, no matter what you will be doing, I would suggest that you get at least 2 inputs so that you can do stereo recordings or have the option of doing so should the need arise. Same for podcasts. You can have at least 2 speakers. As for the outputs, 2 will be enough for beginners because you can connect your monitors to it. If you use 4 outputs, you can actually have more monitors, 2 different pairs, and then switch between them. Or you can do a 5.1 setup, or you can send audio to an external device as a compressor. There are more practical ways of doing that, but it's a bit more advanced for now. It's for another video. But bottom line is, think of how many instruments you want to be recording at the same time and just go with that. Again, personally, I suggest a minimum of 2 inputs for the very beginners. Now, connectivity is also something you might want to consider. Now, most budget ones will connect via a USB, a standard USB. Some will be Thunderbolt, some will be USB-C, and some will connect via FireWire. So make sure your computer has the necessary ports to connect your audio interface. And lastly, all the audio interfaces that are being produced will have that function, but I need to mention it just to make sure. If you're going to be using a condenser mic, and we will look at what that is in a bit, then you need phantom power. Also on your audio interface, that will be this plus 48V symbol. So without that, you can't use your condenser microphone. But I wouldn't worry too much about it, as every audio interface that is out there has phantom power. Lastly, most audio interfaces will have a combination connector, meaning you can connect either your instrument with a jack or you can connect your mics with an XLR. More on mics, more on cables in a bit. Let's talk microphones. Normally, this could be a video on its own, but let's cover the very basics that you need to know. Now, the main 3 types of microphones that are used in most studios and home studios are dynamic, condenser, and ribbon microphones. Now, my main focus for this section will be the dynamic and the condenser. If you're a beginner and you're buying your first microphone, I would probably go with one of these 2 and not with the ribbon. So which one is better? The honest answer is none. Different sound, different applications. You pick the right one depending on what you will be recording. So the cheapest ones and more robust ones are the dynamic mics. So they're great for loud instruments, live applications, and they can take a beating. They're really robust. They don't have the sensitivity of the condenser mics though. The condenser mics will be more sensitive and accurate, but they're way more fragile and expensive. And they need phantom power to operate, the plus 48 symbol we talked about in the audio interface section. So this can be a very long section because there are many variables you need to take into consideration when you buy a good microphone. So what will you be recording? What is the recording environment? Will you be using it live, or is it just a studio mic? What's the budget like? For example, if you're recording, let's say, loud electric guitars, both will do the job, but the dynamic will handle loud sources much better. If your recording environment is terrible and you have not treated your room, then the condenser mic will pick all of that up. A dynamic mic is more forgiving, and if you're using it for live applications, then a dynamic mic again is preferable. If you want something more accurate and sensitive, and your recording environment is decent, I would go with a condenser mic. So just look at what you will be doing and choose the appropriate mic for the job. I will not get into much detail about microphones such as small or large diaphragm, polar patterns, etc. All of these are for another video, but these are the basics that you need to know. Now, one of the things you will most likely need when you will be using a microphone to record vocals is a pop filter. There are three things that a pop filter is used for. The first and most obvious one is that it helps eliminate or lessen, depending on the distance, the plosives, the T and the P sounds. Second, it helps you keep the right distance. You can't get too close. And getting too close in mics that do not have a real omnidirectional pattern will produce a bass buildup, also known as proximity effect. Third, lots of singers are spitters. Spit and humidity are not good for your mic. So the pop filter is your first line of defense against that. There are many kinds of pop filters. You have these, the foam filters where you can put them on top of the mic, and you have the nylon mesh, which is essentially a pantyhose. If you are into DIY, you can certainly use a pantyhose to make your own pop filters. And you also have the ones with the metal mesh. Here are two examples with and without a pop filter.
People, Puff, Power, Pinky, Thomas, Taki. People, Puff, Power, Pinky, Thomas, Taki. People, Puff, Power, Pinky, Thomas, Taki.
Lastly, I need to mention that you don't necessarily need a pop filter. You can simply play around with the angle of the mic and be off axis. That way it won't pick up any of the plosives. And lastly, we need to talk about cables and what kind of cables you will be using. So we have two types, balanced and unbalanced cables. Now, even though you might not be able to hear it, there is electromagnetic interference around us. So unbalanced cables will actually pick that noise up from your equipment, the radio, the television, or the lights. The reason I'm mentioning this is because if you will be using unbalanced cables, you need to keep them as short as possible, so less than 2 meters. And with balanced cables, you do not actually have this problem. So the first important cable that you will be using is the XLR, which is a balanced cable. This is used on microphones and it is the preferred cable for monitors because it is balanced, but you can also use a jack cable for your monitors. Now there are many types of XLR cables, but the one you will see the most and the most popular one is the 3-pin type. So you have the female and the male side. Small tip, when you connect them to your mic, do not twist around until you find the spot it goes in. For most cables, you just place the button in the front and you simply push in. Also, phantom power off when you connect a mic. 99% of the time, it will be fine. I have never heard anyone damage a modern mic like that. But better safe than sorry, and it's also in the manual of your mic. Now, next cable you will need, especially if you're recording, electric instruments, is the 1/4 inch jack. There are two types. We've got the TRS and the TS. And the way you can tell them apart is, and actually how they got their name, is that the TS has a T for tip and an S for sleeve. So TS, and the TRS has a tip, ring and sleeve, TRS. The one you use with your bass and electric guitars will be the unbalanced one, so TS. You can use a TRS of course, but the electric guitar and bass are unbalanced instruments, so you won't get the benefits of that cable. So get the TS for your instruments because it is cheaper. You also have the smaller version of the jack, the 3.5mm or headphone jack. As you can guess, it is used for headphones, but it is also used for instruments because lots of synthesizers actually have this type of output. Speaking of which, how do we connect a synth like that, or your headphones, to your audio interface that requires a 1/4 inch jack? You use an adapter. You make the 3.5mm into a 1/4 inch jack. Now the last cable you might need is a MIDI cable. Now, most of the times this can simply be replaced by USB cable. So if you're using your MIDI keyboard or electric piano, you can actually use a USB cable to send MIDI information. But if you're using a synthesizer, you can actually use a MIDI to sync your instruments if you're using more than one. And also, if you want to connect multiple equipment, such as synthesizers, via MIDI out, you can do what is called a MIDI daisy chain. And that's pretty much everything about cables that you need to know when you get started. There's of course way more than that, but that's all you need to get started. So now that you have your mic, you need to place it somewhere to record. So you need a mic stand. That is the only thing in the whole video that I would suggest that you don't get the cheapest one you can. Cheap microphone stands are a pain in the butt. Not only will they be annoying because sometimes they can't hold a heavy mic and they will start drifting downwards, but they break really easily and they might damage your mic. So believe you me, it is not worth it. My recommendation, just pay the extra £25 and get the decent one. And you have many kinds of stands. You have the table stands, tripod stands, round base stands, tripod boom stands, boom arm stands, low stands, overhead stands. And let's say you're doing a podcast. You need one of the table stands or boom arm stands. I'm actually using one of those for my tutorials because space is an issue. If you're doing any kind of music recording, no matter if it's vocals or instruments, the most convenient one and versatile one is the tripod boom stand. Again, there are many kinds of stands. See what you will need and get the right one for your job. And in my recommendations, I will actually skip the very cheap ones because I honestly believe I will be doing you a disservice. Next, if you're a media composer, a producer, songwriter, or do any kind of music, you need a MIDI controller. Now, MIDI, which stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, is a communications protocol. So in very simple language, it allows your computer to communicate with your MIDI controller in whatever form that is. And a MIDI controller can be in the form of a keyboard, a pad, wind instruments, faders, knobs, anything. So let's take a MIDI keyboard for example. On its own, it does nothing. It's not a musical instrument. It does not produce any kind of sound. But when you connect it though to your DAW, you can control your virtual instruments. So by using the controller, you can play any instrument that you want. And you can of course, program it manually in the piano roll, but using a controller not only makes it more musical and human, but it's actually much faster. And even if you can't play the piano, I would still suggest that you get one because once you pick up the basics, your producing game and songwriting game will actually skyrocket. And the good thing is that you can put your hands on it. It's not software, so you will find that doing manual work when it comes to music and having something to touch makes a ton of difference instead of just clicking through the presets of your software synth. Now, if you're into beat making, get a pad, or even better, get a MIDI keyboard with pads. So let's start with the keys. There are three types of keys. The first one is the weighted hammer action, which is the closest thing to a piano, to a real piano. Then you get the semi-weighted action keys. These are similar, but they're a bit lighter and a bit springier. And lastly, you get the lightweight or synth action keys. If you're not a pianist and you don't care about the feel of it, then get the synth action keys. These are the cheapest one. And that's another thing actually about the MIDI controllers. You don't need to spend a lot of money if you're not using it to practice your piano. You can get away with something relatively cheap. Now, another thing you should consider is the size. What size should you get? They come into 25, 49, 61 and full-sized piano, 88 keys, which is 7 octaves. So think of what you will be doing and get the appropriate one. Also, if you have an electric piano or electric keyboard, they can also be used as a MIDI controller. And that's basically what you need to get started. I wish there was one solution that would actually fit all of your needs, but unfortunately, different needs require different equipment and different budget. So choose wisely, and whenever you can, invest in good quality products, because most likely you will be using your equipment for many years. Lastly, as technology evolves, Certain sections of this video, like the computer one, will become outdated. So translate that to the current time you are watching the video. The rest are pretty much the same and will be for many years. Now, if you want to see my recommendations about gear and everything, check part 2 of this video. Other than that, thank you very much for watching and I will see you in the next one.